If you're struggling with anxiety, you may have been bombarded with these anxiety coping mechanisms, things like breathing techniques, or try this supplement, or have you seen one of those inhalers where it helps relieve your anxiety? Maybe it's an anxiety ring. All these different things that are used to help with anxiety. Well, in this video, I want to share with you why those things are really a waste of time and what to focus on instead, because these things are used to help manage your anxiety. But what if there was another way? What if there's a way you can overcome these symptoms once and for all? This way you don't need to rely on these coping tricks. So with that said, let's get started. So when I was experiencing anxiety, I was getting it all, right? Physical symptoms that were just too bizarre to be anxiety. I was getting feelings of unreality, which were convincing me I was going crazy. And on top of that, I was getting intrusive thoughts, feelings like, what if this is gonna be me forever? What if this is the onset of something terrible? What if this is a genetic issue? And I was struggling with all these different things that I was desperate to overcome this and get out of this. And what I would do is every time I tried to find ways to eliminate this, what I instead would get were coping crutches, coping mechanisms. So I would Google search my symptoms and I would Google search anxiety relief. And what I would often find are things that were more about managing your anxiety. They would try to sell me supplements online. Somebody would try to say, hey, it's this specific diet or it's this breathing technique. But the point is that I was getting all these different solutions to anxiety, and I always thought, I'm like, why am I always getting coping mechanisms? Is this always something I'm gonna be dealing with? Are people just selling me coping crutches because there's no way to get out of it? And that was my biggest fear, which was this idea that I was always gonna have to manage this for the rest of my life. And I thought even if I was managing, this wasn't a quality of life that I wanted. It was almost like it was too difficult to do anything in life with these symptoms. And so you might be in the same position where you may have tried a bunch of things to alleviate your anxiety, and maybe it helped a little bit, maybe marginally, but your symptoms were still there. And you weren't ever really free of this. And you may be thinking, well, if these things don't work, maybe my symptoms are just too intense. My anxiety is just too different. Well, that's not actually true. And as somebody who's overcome this and now guides people to overcoming, there's a reason why you get a lot of these coping crutches and these coping solutions. See, it's very important to define what anxiety is and what causes it, right? There's anxiety like an emotion, which is, imagine you're about to give a presentation that's very important in front of a bunch of people that you really look up to. You would feel a strong amount of anxiety right before you're about to present and even while you're presenting. And the reason why anxiety is there is because anxiety doesn't want you to ruin that presentation. It wants you to do a good job. So it heightens as a way for you to become more focused and take it seriously. So that's one type of anxiety. Now, the other type of anxiety is anxiety as a state. This is where you are like me, where you're experiencing intense physical symptoms. The point is that type of anxiety is very different. That anxiety is based on state. Now, here's the issue. Regardless of which anxiety you're in, typically the solutions that you find that are more readily available are coping crutches, things to help alleviate your anxiety in the moment. And those types of crutches are really used for the first type of anxiety. Imagine you have to give a presentation, you have to talk to people, and it's important that you do. It's important that you don't run away from this and you actually do what needs to be done. Well, in that case, coping mechanisms can help, right? Maybe having a breathing exercise before going on stage will help relieve some of the anxiety. Now, notice I say relieve some of the anxiety. Notice that it's not a shield for your anxiety. You will still experience anxiety, but it helps you relieve some of it. But when you try to use those techniques on someone who is sensitized, somebody who's experiencing anxiety as a state, well, that doesn't really work. And what that might bring is just short-term comfort. And this is why the mentorship, by the way, does really well, because what we really focus on is long-term freedom. Why just cope and manage with your symptoms when we can really focus on eliminating these symptoms? And so the focus with anxiety recovery is focusing on eliminating these symptoms once and for all so that you don't have to rely on these things. But when you're trying to find a solution to your anxiety, well, there's no differentiation between the first type of anxiety or second. You're always provided solutions for the first type of anxiety, where you might be in a stressful situation that you can't get out of, and you can use something to help cope or manage with your anxiety. And so the first thing to understand is that a lot of the issues that anxiety sufferers have is the fact that there's no differentiation. When you just say anxiety, a lot of people say, well, anxiety is not something you can overcome because anxiety is an emotion. But they're disregarding anxiety as a state, which is something you're going through. But that being said, a lot of the focus is more on coping and managing. And the reason why the focus is on that is because, well, it's quick and it's fast. I can create a video on YouTube right now that says eliminate your anxiety in less than 60 seconds. And that video will do much better than any of my other videos about overcoming anxiety. And the reason why is because it appeals to people's selfish desires. They want to feel better right now. And I get it. When I was going through anxiety, it was a terrible feeling and I wanted to overcome this as quickly as possible. And this is also the danger of coping crutches, which is you're always trying to find ways to feel better right now. But what happens is every time you're trying to chase comfort, what it does is that it reinforces the anxiety. See, your anxiety doesn't know what's a real threat and what's not. It's looking at you for that. And if it's looking at you from running away from something, even if that's an emotion, even if that's a feeling, even if that's a symptom, well, then the anxiety says, oh, Sean is running away from something. Well, we need to keep our anxiety alive. So you may be trying something that may be helping your anxiety, but long term, what that does is that it reinforces the anxiety being there. Because again, when you're sensitized, your nervous system gets a little bit disoriented. It doesn't know what's a threat and what's not anymore. So what it does is that it becomes very hypersensitive. And it does that because it doesn't know what's a threat and it doesn't want to be wrong. So it assumes everything is a threat. So again, coping mechanisms are really used because, well, it's what people want. People want coping mechanisms because they want to feel better in the moment. So you have to understand coping mechanisms is something that everybody wants. They want to feel better right now. And if somebody can sell you something to feel better right now, well, then that seems very appealing. However, if you were like me, you always had this idea of, am I always going to have to do this for the rest of my life? And a lot of the things that I'm using isn't really even helping me long term. I was still getting panic attacks. I was still agoraphobic. I was still losing a ton of weight. And so for me, I was like, I want to get to the root cause. I felt like all these coping mechanisms were just a band-aid. I felt like they were just there to make me feel better in the moment, but I was asking myself, why is this happening? Because before I fell into the cycle, I never had to rely on any coping mechanisms. I could do anything fearlessly. I wasn't a shy person. I liked going out, and I never thought about the fact of, hey, that makes me nervous. I don't want to do it. I would say, yeah, this would make anybody feel nervous, but go do it anyway. Or don't do it. It doesn't matter, but the nervousness wasn't the deciding factor. But when I was struggling with anxiety, now everything became, how is this going to make me feel? What happens if I pass out from my panic attack? What happens if it causes some really intense physical symptoms that are just very uncomfortable? And so coping mechanisms I knew was just a band-aid. It was just numbing the symptoms, but it wasn't eliminating it. And this is where anxiety recovery comes in. And this is why we get the results we do, because what we really focus on is not coping crutches. Coping crutches have their place. I always say to my clients, once you're better and once you're desensitized and you don't experience anxiety symptoms, then if you want to use coping mechanisms like when you're about to go on a presentation or do something that makes you a little bit anxious, those things are useful. And if you want to do that in the future, that's fine. But right now, the focus is on overcoming these symptoms. And what happens is that once you desensitize your nervous system, well, one of the side effects is that you don't experience these symptoms anymore. So you don't have to rely on coping mechanisms. So how do you do that? How do you focus on overcoming the anxiety? Well, if you really want to understand how to desensitize your nervous system, I wrote a book. It's an ebook down below. You can check it out. It will be sent to you on your email within a few minutes of signing up. And what it does is that it lays out how recovery looks like, what to expect, and really the tools that you need to focus on long-term freedom. Now, the last thing I will mention is this. See, a lot of people, when it comes to selling anxiety relief, don't really have your best interest at heart. And here's what I mean. These people want you to feel better in the moment. But the truth is that recovery does come from within. That doesn't mean you don't necessarily need a guide. A guide is incredibly useful and it makes the recovery process a lot easier. However, recovery still does come from within. And so if somebody's trying to sell something that's anxiety related, well, there's no incentive for them to tell you, hey, recovery comes from within. Now, I'm not saying that the people that are selling these things have bad intentions. I don't think that at all. I really think they want to help you. I really think they want to bring some level of comfort towards you, and what they're selling, they really believe in. They really feel like it can alleviate the anxiety. However, when it comes to overcoming this, making sure this all goes away, it's just not in their interest, because if they're serious about that, well, then what's there to sell you? And this is why I always say, focus on long-term freedom and find somebody who can guide you long-term to overcoming this once and for all. Because look, you can recover on your own. However, it does take work, and sometimes there's a lot of frustration. And when you haven't gone through the recovery journey, you're not sure what's normal and what's not. Are you heading the right direction? Are you not? And so finding a guide is the best solution, and a guide who's interested in making sure that eventually you become your own guide. They don't want you to rely on them forever. They're really interested in helping you heal, and then you become your own guide moving forward, not relying on anything or anyone. So if you focus on that, well, then the good news is that long-term freedom, all these symptoms go away. And then once you're better, if you want to go into these coping mechanisms and stuff like that, that's totally fine. A lot of people think I'm totally against them. I'm not. I actually think they're great. Meditation, yoga, these are things I do all the time. However, I don't use it as a way to escape the anxiety. These things are not a shield from anxiety. Once I got better, then the effects of these things like meditation, yoga were actually a lot more powerful. Now, the last thing I want to say is if you're interested in overcoming this and you're having difficulty finding a guide, I totally understand. It's actually very hard to find somebody who's fully overcome this, who really specializes in helping people overcome this. And so if you want that to be me, if you want that to be my team, where we've helped people around the world overcome this. We were anxiety sufferers ourselves. We know exactly what people are going through and what to do to overcome. Well, then you can click the link down below and apply for the mentorship. In the mentorship, we work with people long-term, and we focus on making sure they become their own guide. We make sure all these symptoms go away and they go back to living happily without any of these things. Now, when you do click the link, it is an application process. We don't allow everybody in. We really want to make sure that we're focusing on long-term freedom, and we really want to make sure the people that we're working with, it's a right fit for them and it's a right fit for us. So go ahead and click the link down below, and we can schedule a quick chat where we can really see what your biggest issues are, what you've tried. Is this something that we can help you with? And if so, we would just take you under our own wing and just get you to recovery ourselves, so that you don't have to figure out all these different things or spend all your money on these coping mechanisms that don't even work. So with that said, I'll see you in the next one.